On today's show, with the Cavs playing the Hawks on Tuesday, we're going to talk about the different paths of two teams who made big trades for guards and gave up a lot of draft picks in the process last summer. Let's dive into it.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
All right, that music you heard on the way in is from our friends at Astro Radio. Check them out on your music platform of choice. This episode is, as always, produced by the indomitable Jake Stevens. I'm Chris Manning. That is Evan Dammarell. We're the Locked On Cavs podcast. Segment 1 today, we're going to look about how the Cavs are probably happy with their trade and how the Hawks maybe are not particularly happy with the trade they made last summer. Segment 2, we're going to look at what maybe internal factors, and we'll kind of have to fly through those because I think there's a couple that are big there, but we'll dive through the internal factors that contributed to the Cavs Donovan Mitchell trade working and maybe why the DeJounte Murray trade hasn't quite worked as well in Atlanta. And then segment 3, we're going to preview Cavs Hawks at 7:30 p.m. Third game between these two teams that's in Atlanta, and then the Cavs are off until Friday when they host the New York Knicks. But Evan, let's start with these trades. And I wanted to start with a big picture thing on this. I think these trades, the Cavs for Mitchell, the Hawks for Murray, and I think you put the Rudy Gobert one in there as well. They are such a good look at how many picks teams should be careful about giving up. I am very pro teams trying to win. I am not just about teams just trying to play the asset game until the crows come home, right? Like I am go for stuff when you feel it is right. But I think last summer tells us that there are different paths that work. There are a lot of reasons to be very careful and judicious about giving up all of these picks. I would posit that only one of the three teams that made a big trade last summer is happy with their trade, at least in terms of the outcome they have gotten so far. Maybe some of these things get better. Maybe things improve in these other situations. But if there's one team that is absolutely thrilled about their trade and feels great about it, it's the only one right now I would posit is the Cleveland Cavaliers.
I agree with that take. It's also an interesting thought exercise to think there's a possibility or a different reality where the Cavs get DeJounte Murray instead of Donovan Mitchell. Maybe Donovan Mitchell ends up with the Hawks, and who knows what that looks like down the line as well. But I agree with you. Like the Timberwolves sold the farm for Rudy Gobert, and they tried to make or tailor things more to Gobert than they did anything else. The Atlanta situation is just a mess across the board, starting with Trae Young, the coaching situation. I think Quinn Snyder is going to fix some things for it, but I don't think it's going to be something you see immediately for Atlanta. But in Cleveland's case, when you look at how Donovan Mitchell's just kind of been a hand-in-glove fit from the get-go, where you and I, when the trade was first announced, there's going to be some growing pains. And sure, there were. I think maybe not for Garland and Mitchell, but for everyone else on the roster with Mitchell. But it's paid off in spades for Cleveland at this point. They're on track to win 50-ish games this year. They could be the 3 seed in the Eastern Conference. This is the kind of move you want to make if you're the Cavs, if you want to go from fringe playoff / play-in team to a legitimate force in the Eastern Conference, and it's paying off already, whereas you look at Atlanta or even in Minnesota's case, it hasn't worked out for them at all, and they're kind of stuck in a rudderless position trying to find the way to find a path where they're in a similar spot to the Cavs. But yeah, Cleveland, at least in terms of just recency bias and maybe instant returns on the exchange, the Cavs are the biggest winners just between these three teams that made the splashiest moves last offseason.
Where I think things get interesting is just that I look at the Wolves, they're 7th. They did change their defensive scheme to really accommodate Gobert and change what they asked Cat to do. I think that's been tricky. Obviously, Cat missed a ton of time. They traded for Gobert at this moment that was Gobert is heading towards a different phase. He'd had this really high run. You can feel how you want about him, but was a very impactful player, but is due a lot of money headed towards this specific thing. Murray is had the best season of his career last year. The I can't Evan and I are not watching the Hawks night in and night out, right? That is not this situation. I've watched them a fair bit, but it's you're not seeing.
Nor were we watching the Spurs every game last season either.
Right, but I watch it. I watch as much as I can, and you look at the numbers and you figure some of this out, and the numbers would tell you that Murray hasn't been as as good this year. Like, the analytics last year had him as like the best of his career, like a very good two-way player. And this year it's not been that for him. And, like, what does that say about, his fit with Trey? Like, what does that say about what his role is going to be? Like, all these things are complicated. And like, I also understand like how teams decide they want to go for something. And like, I do understand that it's like the Wolves, it's like, okay, we have Cat, we have Anderson, let's go for a splash to get a new general manager in. Okay, the Hawks are like, okay, we made the conference finals 2 years ago. Last year we didn't hit, we kind of had to get through the play-in tournament. Didn't make a playoff run in the same way. Let's go try to get something to kind of complement Trey and shake things up a little bit. And like those moves did not work. Whereas the Mitchell one, the Cavs, I think, maybe benefited more than anything else. This maybe leads a little bit into the second segment, is that Mitchell really has just kind of like things have changed. Things are different. This is not the same team run back from last year, but he has fit in to like a lot of what was there. Like he hasn't, I don't think, changed. He hasn't like made Darius Garland like change how he plays. Darius Garland is still very much Darius Garland. Evan Mobley has like been given the room to still grow, which was going to be a necessary thing here, right? Like all of this stuff has just been like Mitchell accentuated what was already there. And looking at these other teams, I don't know if I feel the same way about those other things. And maybe these teams make these trades anyway, but if it makes me just wonder like how careful you should be if you're one of these teams and you want to give up just all of these future picks.
I agree with you. I think the Donovan Mitchell bump, it changed expectations, certainly. Maybe Cleveland's culture was just too strong to fail, but your point is 100% accurate. Like Donovan Mitchell, no disrespect to DeJounte Murray or even Rudy Gobert, was a superstar caliber player being sent to the Cleveland Cavaliers, whereas DeJounte Murray is, like you said, at least last season, an elite two-way player, a former All-Star. Rudy Gobert is a former perennial defensive player of the year, but I had reservations with the Wolves giving up that much for a center who is either entering or kind of exiting his prime, or maybe is in his prime right now. Like, just is a lot of questionable fits. Like, the Wolves are just a questionable team in general. Like, the same with the Hawks. Like, it's tough to fully figure out how trades function. Like, I talked about different realities in my first point, but there's a reality where like Mitchell doesn't work and maybe Murray does and Gobert does, and the Cavs are kind of reeling a little bit from the situation. But trades are a gamble, and you have to be confident in what you're building, what your culture is, just all the factors outside of this trade to make sure that like this doesn't rock the boat too much. And in the Murray situation, it rocked the boat in terms of just like picks, compensation and changes and everything like that. And also just the Hawks are just an oddly run organization where they're constantly looking to make trades to maybe get back to the Eastern Finals like they did, or maybe in the NBA Finals. But they're a bit of a mess, and maybe Quinn Snyder can fix it, like I said. And then like the Wolves, they're just odd in general. And I think like the trade for D'Angelo Russell going to the Lakers and them getting Mike Conley back is just to kind of give them salary relief, because they're like, oh crap, we have Rudy Gobert on our payroll for the foreseeable future.
Well, it's like, hey, like but it's also like, hey, like we need someone that just gets how to play with Rudy Gobert.
That too.
And no one else on that team knew how to play with Rudy Gobert except for Mike Conley.
I think that's the oddest thing, and I think more so compliment to Donovan Mitchell. And to your point, like the Cavs didn't have to go out and like make a move to find a player that fits better with Donovan Mitchell, whereas Donovan Mitchell became malleable and adapted his game to what the Cavs need. And like you see that defensive bumper, and he's arguably having the best season of his career with the Cavs this year. Maybe it's a reinvigoration, but
not arguably. It is the best season of his career.
It is the best season of his career. We're in agreement on that. And I think that's credit to Mitchell. I think that's credit to the Cavs coaching staff. Like, I think it's just like a lot of factors that were in play, and somehow it's just like a perfect storm, and they caught lightning in a bottle and they made it function and click and work. And it's great. Like, if you're the Cavs, you are patting yourself on the back, because shoot, with how well Donovan Mitchell has played this year, Larry Markkinen, Colin Sexton, Ochai Agbaji, some first round picks and future swaps feels like too little for what Donovan Mitchell has given you. And you're more than pleased with giving up that much for him to begin with.
All right. We're going to talk about some of these factors, but today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The tournament is heating up. We're into the Final Four on the men's side. We're deep into the Elite Eight, heading into the Final Four on the women's side. And there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. There's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up today to claim your no sweat first bet. Then you can wager on everything from the money line to the point spread to what team's going to be cutting down the net. And look, that's all in an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. So don't miss your chance at a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon today. That is, again, if you join FanDuel right now today. Make every moment more with FanDuel. All right, Evan, what we're gonna do for this segment here is I have 4 things that I think we should hit on that are contributing factors, and I think just considering we have about 8 to 10 minutes here, I'm gonna pull my timer, my stopwatch, 2 minutes on the clock. We're gonna get this compactly done. Number 1, Darius Garland. Darius Garland has proven to be a incredibly malleable and giving co-partner for Donovan Mitchell. And this does not work if Darius Garland is like, nah, F this. I want to be the man. I got to do this last year. If he is not willing to play the way he has and turn over some of the responsibility to Mitchell, this does not work the way it has.
I agree with you. I wonder how much Darius studied guys like Mike Conley. I think having Ricky Rubio in the back in his ear as well works. I think Bickerstaff having experience with obviously Rubio and Mike Conley in the past. Like, there is so many ways just outside of Darius Garland being malleable to work with Donovan Mitchell that it has been a seamless fit. I am very much surprised and pleased to see that this fit wasn't as clunky as it might have been at first, just because it's 2 ball dominant guards learning to function with one another. I just think it's super impressive that Garland is putting up the same production he had last year, all while sharing the floor and the responsibilities of Donovan Mitchell on offense.
Basically, if you look at like the analytics version of it, same amount of expected wins as last year. He's got a higher EPM. He's rated out as a better defender, and he's basically about the same offensive output it's a 1% lower usage, playing about the same minutes per game. Going to finish close to the same amount of games he played last year, and like most of his numbers are basically the same. He's turning the ball over less, which is maybe the biggest leap he's made all year. And he's really settled into like, I'm going to be the guy that keeps the trains running on time and make everything work. And he's not going to be like in the All-NBA discussion. The guard spots are too competitive, but like that guy should be like on the honorable mentions. He's having like an incredible year. Like, I think he's a better All-NBA candidate than Jalen Brunson is where I've at with it and started to dive into that.
I agree with you on that. Do you think he's not going to get it, but he's a sneaky good option for most improved player as well, just with how well he's played this year. Just like the turnovers and assists and just like all these small mitigating factors that
I think he would have got it last year. I think he would have got it last year if he was going to get it. I think Mobley is Mobley next year is the Cav to get most improved.
I think there's a lot of award candidates the Cavs could have had last year, whether it's Kevin Love, 6th Man of the Year, JB Bickerstaff, Coach of the Year, Darius Garland, MIP, Evan Mobley, Rookie of the Year, and they didn't win them, but it's kind of impressive just how much all these guys have improved and gotten better, but they're not in the conversation. But hey, if you're the Cavs, I don't think you want Singletary awards. You want to try and make some noise in the playoffs. So I think they definitely are going to do that. What's your next point?
All right, Donovan Mitchell. He showed up motivated as F. Can't swear, but Donovan Mitchell clearly showed up and was like, I went out in a bad way in Utah last year. I need to play 2-way basketball. I need to be engaged. I need to be a leader. I need to step out of like as far as he's kind of framed it, I think a little bit step outside of his comfort zone a little bit in terms of how he speaks about things. He has been like the guy that shows up at the podium after games. He's the guy like talking to the coaches when he comes off the floor. He feels like he is like setting like the drumbeat and the expectations for this team. And if Mitchell had showed up and been like, not going to do that, this team would be worse off for it, and this trade could have looked differently. So he himself, there's a lot of credit, and it tells you, I think, a lot about how quality Mitchell is that he showed up and been this dude.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think more so just like he openly admitted that he expected to be a part of the Knicks. I think we all did last offseason, and he didn't make a stink about it because, New York, wonderful city. Cleveland, also a wonderful city, but New York is home for Mitchell. It's also got a lot more going for it amenity-wise just compared to Cleveland, but he came in, as Chris said, like adapted himself to Cleveland's situation. He didn't make the Cavs bend their will to him. Like, yeah, they adapted to having Donovan Mitchell on the floor, but I think him working in unison and tandem with the Cavs personnel and coaching staff has been really helpful. I think, like you said, he wanted to show that maybe just what happened against the Mavericks in the playoffs last year wasn't just like what he's going to be. He has admitted on several occasions like he kind of lost his fire and fun factor in basketball in his last few years in Utah, and like in Cleveland this year, it's kind of re-sparked his love for the game again. And I think that's certainly a huge factor as well. And like you said, he adapted to the situation. Like he became more of a two-way player, and he's having the best season of his career, especially on the defensive side of the ball. It's still wild to say Donovan Mitchell is a two-way player for the Cavs, because when this trade went down, you and I had the defensive concerns, and it's kind of been hushed a little bit with just Mitchell at least trying on that side of the ball and providing production.
Yeah. He's been great. Should be locked for All-NBA. All right, number 3, JB Bickerstaff. Not going to win Coach of the Year. I think Mike Brown's probably getting that, and I think very well deserved.
Correct.
But Bickerstaff, if they had the wrong coach and the buy-in wasn't there, and I think Atlanta is maybe the kind of good comparison for this, because like clearly there's no buy-in from at least Trey with Nate McMillan, and that really sabotages what was going on there.
Yeah.
And if that had happened here, and there wasn't a rapport between Bickerstaff and the guys from last year, and then a rapport between Donovan and JB, this does not work. And like him being the guy, I think truly has mattered.
I agree with you. I think it also helps that the front office gave the Cavs, and more so JB Bickerstaff, the benefit of the doubt. They knew like, hey, this is going to be a growing process. This is a rebuild out of LeBron leaving for a second time. Like they have to take their time and bide their time on this one. And I think Bickerstaff kind of having that runway to grow as a coach as well, because he is incredibly young. He's not the youngest coach in the playoffs, but he's towards the bottom of the list in terms of age at this point. But that's helpful because he's grown a lot as a coach. He talked about it prior to the Rockets game the other day, where he felt like he was coaching for his life because it's just chaos and they're just coming off the Western Finals and there's the James Harden factor and everything else. Then he still gets fired after the fact, where it's a similar situation in Memphis where he's coaching for his life, whereas in Cleveland, he wasn't named the interim coach to start things off after John Beilein stepped down. He was just named head coach, and the Cavs have ridden with him, good and bad, and mostly good at this point now. But there were spells throughout the season where like Bickerstaff made some questionable decisions, and there's some growing experiences. But like you said, he has his finger on the pulse of this locker room. He has the full faith and trust of his coaching staff and his players, and I think that's what I'm talking about. Like Cleveland maybe feels confident enough that their culture is too strong to fail, that if they bring in a superstar like Donovan Mitchell, they can adapt to that situation and make him assimilate into what they're building and just make themselves stronger as a whole for it.
Yeah, I think like too strong to fail is like, I think an interesting question, just because I think it's like hard to kind of know some of that unless you're like,
I think winning
deep inside
takes a lot of this too. Like this culture aspect for Cleveland really took a turnaround when the Cavs came out hot last season and continued to keep winning.
Mm-hmm. Winning helps.
Winning helps a lot. Like you look at the Hawks, there's a toxic situation, but they're not playing well. You look at like the Jazz last year with Gobert and Mitchell, like the playoff burnouts and washouts that they had were probably eating at them. The COVID aspect of the Gobert probably ate at the locker room morale as well. Like there's a lot of stuff at play, and like the Cavs for some reason remain steady Eddie, and I think winning helps a lot with that.
Last thing, Evan Mobley. Evan Mobley's the last one here. He's ascending. He is becoming like, I think the third best guy on the team. I think he's becoming this like superstar that is raising it to another level. And the way that like, like the Wolves, Cat missed a bunch of the year, and started off slow. Atlanta hasn't gotten like upward trajectory stuff from like DeAndre Hunter, and they traded Kevin Huerter and like all this stuff. The Cavs like to the upper percentile, right? Got this like superstar young breakout from Evan Mobley. And like that is as much as part of why this has worked in a lot of degrees to me, in a lot of ways, just because Mobley has given you more and given you so much, and he just is another like layer to like how good this team has gotten, and he is going to keep being that, I think, going forward in a way that none of these other teams have, and that would like, he's a generational guy, so like that's not replicable, but like that if you feel like you have that guy, maybe it makes these trades easier to pull off if you have someone that can continue to help boost you as you go forward.
I think Evan Mobley's biggest strength coming out of his rookie season to now is just how adaptable he is as a player. You bring in Donovan Mitchell, and Bickerstaff's mentioned this a lot. Like the Cavs weren't expected to be good last year, but like Evan Mobley wasn't demanding or chucking up 20 shots to try and build his offensive repertoire. He'd rather grind and help the team win, whether it's through the little things or on defense. And you see This year, it's a lot of that where he is that flashpoint, that conduit for the Cavs playing this quote unquote winning basketball because he's doing all the little things on defense and he's letting his offensive game grow at a pace he's comfortable at, all while Donovan Mitchell is just trying to get comfortable with the rest of this team where you don't see like a bunch of just alphas, I guess, just represent the three alphas in Chicago with Butler, Wade, and Rondo, but there's a lot of strong personalities in that locker room that kind of just mesh coexist well with one another, and there's not really a guy who like wants to be the absolute dominant force, and Mobley's one of those. And I think it's just, again, he is so good. He is the third best player. I agree with you. He could be the second best player on the Cavs by the time the playoffs are done. And I'll reiterate what I said on Monday's show. Like, the Cavs could have a very scary situation in a good way where Mobley is their second best player heading into next season and continues on the trajectory where he becomes the best player. And then it shifts from how far can Donovan Mitchell take this team to how far can Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley take this team with Darius Garland and Jared Allen just flanking them in just star level status.
All right, let's wrap up the show. Let's talk about Cavs Hawks. So, Evan, I think the one of the things I wish this game was in Cleveland just because I would like to see in person what Donovan has to say about Quinn Snyder, because they had such a connection in Utah. He's heaped a lot of praise on him throughout the year this year. And Quinn Snyder is obviously now the coach of the Atlanta Hawks, took over for Nate McMillan after the All-Star break. And I'm just curious to see what Donovan has to say about that. That's a small thing that doesn't super matter, but I'm just kind of curious.
I am curious as well. I did think about that. I'm like, oh yeah, the Hawks did get Sadiq Bey and Quinn Snyder, and Sadiq Bey is working really well as the gunner for the Hawks now. But Quinn Snyder, I think, is a better fit for what the Hawks are trying to do. Maybe they try to do more of the jazzy and stuff on offense and just rely on the strength and athleticism on defense. But I am curious to see what Donovan Mitchell would say, and just more so, like, I want to see like the long-term vision in Atlanta, because when you look at a team like the Hawks, they make a power move like the Cavs did. Like, those two organizations should be primed to be like, okay, yeah, Boston is ascending, Milwaukee's going to age out, but like Atlanta and Cleveland kind of come into that top three conversation, and then they join Boston in that mix for NBA Finals contenders. So maybe this is a way to turn things around for the Hawks and make these matchups a little juicier, just because the Hawks are probably the most disappointing team this season, I'd say, and them are the Wolves, but it's been interesting to watch them function, and I'm kind of curious how this matchup is going to go, just because like the Cavs have locked up a playoff spot, but they are trying to gun for that 3 seed, I think, especially with the Sixers resting Joel Embiid against Denver.
Yeah, what a bummer. What an absolute bummer that is. So in the actual game itself, I think the Cavs should win this. We don't have a line yet up from our fans at FanDuel, but the Cavs should be favored. Like, they are better than Atlanta qualitatively. They've beaten teams at this level pretty recently. If you go back to the last time these two teams played, this is a 1-1 series on the year. Atlanta won the last matchup. This was a game in Atlanta, February 24th, so a little over a month ago, where this was a game where Trae Young took 15 free throws. It was 14 of 15 from the line. The Cavs as a team in that game, he took basically like half the amount of free throws the Cavs did, like, just on his own. Garland was 7 of 7, Mitchell was 5 of 5 in that game, Allen was 6 of 6. But Trae had 34 points, and 14 of those were from the free throw line. That was such like a big advantage for them. It really juiced the offense in that game. They got they also were really hot from 3 in that game. They were 15 of 28. So there's like things of that game that, like, you go back and just look at the box score and look at some of the clips, and I don't know if some of that is super, like, replicable for Atlanta in some ways, but obviously Trae getting to the free throw line is something he's, going to be very good at, and probably get some calls that drive some people mad and make them tweet kind of angry things. Well,
not just tweet angry things, but it could frustrate Bickerstaff. It could frustrate the players, especially because there is going to be, at least I feel, a bit of an emotional hangover after clinching a playoff berth. Like, I know the Cavs are saying all the right things, like, hey, we'll celebrate tonight, but then we shift our focus Monday to Atlanta for the game on Tuesday. But there's going to be a little bit of emotional relief and maybe some weight lifted off some of the players' shoulders. And you got to see how they respond after just clinching a pretty big feat for them, and how they just handle this Hawks team, because there is some emotional aspects that could be triggered here, where it's like Trae Young just getting to the free throw line more often. Like, if you let that stuff bother you enough to let it beat you, like that could be a deciding factor for you. And like, yeah, DeJounte Murray hasn't been a perfect fit, but like he's going to be a grinder on one of Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. Like the Hawks have the pressure points to frustrate the Cavs a little bit, especially with Jared Allen questionable and Isaac with a groin injury and Isaac Okoro questionable with his knee injury. Like the Cavs could be playing shorthanded with Dean Wade being doubtful and Danny Green being out as well.
See, the impact of this game, I think, is pretty straightforward. If the Cavs want to have hopes of being the 3 seed, they enter Monday night's games 2 games back of Philly. We're recording this obviously before they play in Denver without Joel Embiid, who is resting with a calf thing. They kind of got to win this game. Like if there's any hope of that, you need to win that game. And you further just kind of solidify yourself with a win. There's not a ton of time left. There's not a ton of self-love to go. The big game is later this week against the Knicks, but this is a game that if you have any aspirations of getting there, got to win it and Atlanta has some motivation to try to win it. Their hopes of getting out of the play-in are basically not. They're 3 games back of the 6 seed. They're under 500. All the other teams in the from 5, 6, 7 are above 500, but they're trying to probably get as much a possible upper seeding as they can. Stay in 8th. They're tied with the Raptors right now. Staying ahead of Toronto is going to be like if one of these teams has like more straight up to play for tomorrow on Tuesday, it is Atlanta. But the Cavs there is still something at stake, and I'm curious to see too just what kind of if there's any trying anything out. If Danny Green's illness is good, does he get minutes, which Bickerstaff has said he wants to do. But the Hawks probably have more like immediacy to play for in this game, so keep that in mind as you're kind of thinking about it.
So things can't change, but I don't want to burst your bubble. But Green is out tomorrow against the Hawks, or sorry, Tuesday against the Hawks.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Tuesday's episode. But regardless, I am curious to see just how Bickerstaff handles things. Maybe we do see some playoffy stuff. But as we wrap this up, what do you think Cleveland's playoff rotation is going to be? It's obviously the starting 5, and then I think it's just LeVert being your 6th man. Rubio after that, but Cedi Osman might have the opportunity to bump Rubio for minutes, and he's the 7th man for this team, and that's just pretty much what they stick with.
I think I think this is like an episode we should do, but to answer this now, I don't think it's that. I think Rubio's gonna play. I don't think there's any indication that Rubio is not gonna get trust.
I agree. Like it's just maybe he's got a shorter leash than Cedi does right now, just because Cedi provides shooting.
I think if I know what Bickerstaff likes and what he's going to trust and who I think might hold the better defensively, I think it is Rubio. Whereas I think Cedi might get himself in some wing trouble. Maybe not against the Knicks, but if they played certain teams, and he just gets roasted defensively. My guess would be the 5 starters, and then you get to LeVert, then you get to Rubio, and then it's Lamar and Cedi, depending on what the matchup calls for. That would be my guess. I don't think you're going to see Dean. I don't think you're going to, unless something changes, I don't think Danny Green's a part of that. I think, injuries obviously could lead you to see other guys, but I think it is, I think the top 7 feel like Rubio and LeVert, and you're going to play smaller. That's kind of what they've done of late. And then if the matchup calls for it, then it's Lamar. If they need the shooting and he's riding ahead, maybe as a hot hand one night, then, and you feel like you can kind of overcome some of the defensive issues, then I think you could see Cedi.
Okay. Lamar is someone I didn't think of just because he's been getting that weird 5-minute run in the first half and then just nothing in the second half. But maybe that's just Bickerstaff trying back end rotation stuff, or maybe just figuring out some lineup stuff too. But there could be some playoffy things. I was just curious because we did mention playoff stuff the Cavs could experiment with. Maybe if Isaac Okoro and Jared Allen are available to go, you see some of that playoff rotation stuff, and maybe we have a better idea of just minute distribution, because I think you lean on the core 4, and then you just kind of work it as you see fit with the 4 other players we had discussed with them.
Yeah, I think the thing to keep in mind there is Bickerstaff said, and this I think is right, they have a lot more practice time the rest of the way because they have more days off. They have a very light schedule the rest of the way. They play Tuesday, and then they're off until Friday. I would suspect that maybe there's a couple things we have to kind of we see in a game, maybe against the Knicks, or maybe not, because that's the team you're going to see. But I suspect a lot of the stuff they are starting to think about for the playoffs that's going to matter is going to be behind closed doors, under wraps, and you roll it out when you do it in settings where no one can scout it and get film on it. That would be my guess.
I think you're right there. Let's put a pin on it. We'll have to talk about it in a later episode for sure.
Yeah, playoff rotation episode. I think pros and cons of, well, not even LeVert at this point. It's like Lamar, Jetty, and Rubio, and like maybe like Dean just to fill time or something. But I think that is
maybe Danny Green if Danny Green looks like he's right physically with the limited amount of games they have left in the regular season. We can milk the Danny Green content until that udder is empty. But that'll be an episode, I think, right before the playoffs. We can definitely do that. Thanks again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. This episode was produced by Jake Stevens. Now, for your second listen, Game to Game NBA, every moment, every top performance, every result, Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with the local analysis only Locked On can deliver. You can follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA. That is available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again to Jake Stevens. Check out The Marrier on Spotify or your music platform of choice.